Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today we are back looking at the suggestions passed to the developers in December 2019. Now remember, these were the Operation Hotwire results. What Operation Hotwire was over the Christmas period was a way for people of the community to be able to vote on stuff that they wanted to be passed. So this is completely community driven when it comes to what has been passed. And just want to get something out there before we go through some of these suggestions, because I do actually think some of these suggestions are insane after reading through them. The main thing I want to emphasize is when it comes to picking stuff, please don't pick on titles. I see it quite a lot where individuals are talking about, well, you know, this title is misleading, or, you know, the video doesn't represent the title when it comes to my content, or, you know, the title isn't, you know, what I thought it should be, all of this stuff. And what I'm just saying is it is much better to either read the whole article, watch the whole video, and then we start talking about opinions. Because I think what's been happening here when I look at this one specifically, like the other stuff, you know, the aviation, you know, the ground stuff, yeah, there's some crazy things like the Japanese F-16 modernized, but the thing is, you know, it's still kind of cool, it's still kind of interesting. Some of these ideas that are sat here in these mechanics are insane. Like, they are bonkers, and I would say that 95% of people are going to have a look at this and just think, how did this get passed? And the fact is, I think what people have done is they voted on the title and nothing else, and not actually read the stuff. So anyway, let's get started. This is the first one from Ruslan DR, and it's talking about the need for bigger maps and how to implement them. Now, the interesting thing is that title sounds really nice, right? Well, when you actually read the whole thing, it's absolutely insane. And so pretty much what the idea here is because there is a decent amount of the community, or a lot of vocal members of the community, who want larger maps. Unfortunately, because of the addition of the map rotation filter and people being able to ban specific maps and also dislike specific maps and like other ones, what we've seen, especially at high tiers, is a drop-off in these larger maps because people don't want to play them. Therefore, it is the community overall saying to Guardian and others that no, we don't want to play these maps. Instead, we want shorter, smaller maps which definitely have faster gameplay. Then, if you take that idea and then apply it to this, you get two contradicting thoughts, right? Where you have one which is based on a map rotation filter which is completely, fully community driven, and this one which is based on individuals' opinions, therefore we have to see them in different lights. But anyway, after having a look at the justification and then having a look at the how, so the idea is that because War Thunder is able to support maps in excess of 70 kilometers squared, because what's happened here is what Ruslan has done is he's measured one of the maps and he drove around it with a Leopard 2, and he was able to go at around 70 kilometers an hour. It took him about an hour to go from Narofominsk to Moscow. Therefore, this map could easily exist in the game. It would take about, you know, an hour to do so, and the map itself overall could actually be about 100 kilometers squared. Remember, this is an air map that we're talking about right here. So the fact is, these maps are in the game, according to him, for ground forces. Now, if we move on to the next bit, then that begs the question, why are maps only 4 kilometers squared to 10 kilometers squared? And he talks about how this is probably to do with, you know, the fact that there is a lot of fidelity in the game, therefore we need to remove that. We have to, you know, make all of the models lower poly count to the aerialistic maps that we have, and just fill it full of AI, fill it full of everything. And even half the size is willing to go down to 35 kilometers squared on a ground map, right? So his premise is to take a 35 kilometers squared or a 70 kilometers squared map and just fill it full of AI and fill it full of other stuff. There is also some other ideas that he throws in here at the bottom, which you can run through. I'm not going to run through because the initial premise is absolutely insane. And the reason for this is, as a person who has actually played in custom battles, which are over 25 to 30 kilometers, you spend the majority of it driving. You just spend 90% of your time driving to a position. And whether you are on the defensive or the offensive side, you drive to the defensive position and wait, or what you do on the offensive side is drive until you get shot by the people who are waiting in those defensive positions. It is not fun. And as I said, I've played these. I've been through these. I have actually taken the time to create maps like this, create scenarios like this, and get a bunch of people along to try them out. It doesn't work. It's incredibly boring to the average player. What ends up happening is people start leaving after 10 to 15 minutes because they realize if they die once, then what happens is they can't actually get back into the battle for another 5 to 10 minutes because they just have to drive there. And then it just ends up with half teams leaving or half teams just not doing anything apart from just sitting there and talking to each other. And may I just say, one of the things that I am so sick of is people using World War II Online as a relatable game for this idea. Basically because World War II Online has a massive map. It has a half the scale map of Western Europe, 52,000 kilometers squared. And people basically say, well, if they, I mean, you can, here, I'll read it verbatim for you. If they could manage a map size of 52,000 kilometers squared over a decade ago, then why can we not somehow manage more than 10? Because it's boring as all hell and you don't have the player base to back it up. And we're going to go through that. Hopefully, this video will go through why we need to stop using World War II Online as an example for this large map idea actually working. So, let's go through the initial release of World War II Online. Now, it was ages ago, and I'm going to read it all verbatim. You can find all of this information on Wikipedia, there's plenty of sources attached to it, and also I've talked to people who worked on the project at the time, and they also talked about how this was, the general issues that they ran into. The game is commonly recognized as the first MMO FPS, following the purchase of Interactive Creations of Grapevine's Warbirds by iEntertainment Network in 1999. Several of the developers departed the company and formed new gaming companies. Some went to form High-Tech Creations, others went with John Killer McQueen, John Huff, Chris Mo Sherland to leverage their experience on Warbirds and Radar Wars to develop an online gaming network with a massively multiplayer first-person World War II simulation for both PC and Mac as the showpiece. After a lengthy closed beta stage, World War II Online went live on June 6, 2001 under the campaign title Blitzkrieg. The release was timed to coincide with the anniversary of the D-Day. Like most online games, World War II Online is a continual work in progress, and so has a history of updates that are frequently released to add new features, fix problems, and improve existing features. Updates or patches to the game code were released every 6 weeks on average, but recently have moved to less frequent but larger content formats of 3 or 4 times a year. These patches generally include a wide range of features and problem fixes, everything from new weapons and vehicle audits, I've just lost my point. And vehicle to audits of the performance of existing weapons and vehicles are part of the patching process, as well as terrain, structure, gameplay, and performance improvements. So it all sounds great, right? All sounds great so far. They had an initial release, they update the game regularly. Just, by the way, we're getting to the good part, so here is what happens at the actual launch. The initial launch had a number of technical difficulties. The game required that players download a 70 megabyte update before they could play online. At the time, the majority of users had 56K modems, requiring around 3 hours to update the game. As the developers worked feverishly behind the scenes to complete other promised features and fix the software bugs on the gold CD, even more updates became necessary. 3 days prior to release, the colocation network facility had a bad fiber optic cable. The failure reduced the player capacity of the server cluster from 10,000 players to only 1,200. As a temporary workaround, Playnet set up multiple copies of the game world on different servers, distributing the network load, but at some cost in gameplay. The solution lasted for several months while the developers resolved the server-side issues, after which all servers were merged into a single game world. Some features advertised on the box were partially implemented or missing, such as rank and high command strategic features. So you can see the initial launch was horrific, right? Had a lot of issues in it. And now comes the kicker. The combination of the above problems resulted in game returns, complaints from consumers, and a drop-off in sales as word spread of the game's state. Subscription fees, remember, this was a subscription fee-based game, for the first several months were waived until the major problems with the game were resolved. This helped to retain many of the players, especially the long-term fans of the project, but it was not long before Playnet had financial problems. They filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in late 2001 and cut costs, resulting in a number of layoffs within the company. Statements from both the developer and publisher indicated that CRS wanted a longer open beta, but the game was launched anyway due to financial reasons. So the main developer behind this game didn't even last a year. It lasted 6 months before it went into bankruptcy. Now, re-release, right? Remember, it got re-released again afterwards. So World War II Online completed a third retail release in 2005 under the new campaign title Battleground Europe. This new title was chosen because of legal considerations with the old title Blitzkrieg, whose trademark was owned by another game. The Battleground Europe re-release was distributed across Europe in late 2005 and in the United States in early 2006 by the game's new publishers, GMX Media and Matrix Games. World War II Online Battleground Europe was largely a compilation of fixes already available through patches to the original game. However, compared to the initial 2001 release, the game was drastically different due to these changes. So it got improved, right? But if you actually have a look at who those people were and also who is developing the game now, they're all volunteers. Nobody is making money off World War II Online. The money that is made through it goes to keep the servers up, and that is it. And this is shown through the player counts. If you go to the Steam charts, there is peak players per day around about 50 people. Right? 50 people. The average players online at a single time over the last 30 days was 22.7 people. Right? Just think about that. That's less than the amount of people who are in a War Thunder game. Then there were reports in 2017, when it was actually added to Steam, where it got a bump to around 400 players at its peak. Right? So 400 players at its peak, with 150 players being the average for September of 2017. So please, can we stop using this game to compare to War Thunder? It is completely different in its scope, it is completely different on how it is created, it is also completely different from an engine point of view, and also completely different from a server point of view. These two games do not coincide with each other. And also, if you want an experience like that, go play World War II Online. It's not hard to do. We're going to move on to the next one because this idea is just ridiculous. This one is ridiculous. This one makes a little bit more sense. So this is from Tesla Menhun, and this is talking about some rework spawn stuff. So rework of spawns on ground maps. Now, what is used in this one is incredibly nebulous terms, and it's some stuff that I've been thinking about for a while, and I don't really know how to fix it. I actually think spawn camping, unfortunately, because of how stuff is set up in War Thunder, is kind of just an evil which we can't get rid of, and I'll go through why, even if, we had all of these options. So what Tesla wants to do here is he wants to try and get rid of spawn camping, and this is basically because there are a lot of maps where you have spawns which are very open. I suppose Poland or Eastern Europe are great examples of this, and also other maps which are in-game. Basically anything which isn't a city map has a pretty open has a pretty open spawn, apart from maybe something like the 38th parallel. So what Tesla wants to do is once spawn points or spawn pinpoints, I suppose you'd say. So he wants them reworked so that it can be defended by the players in the spawn in case they get pushed back, giving them a chance to fight back and maybe turn around the battle, and the enemy don't have a line of sight from anywhere on the people spawning in, because it's unfair to get sniped inside your own spawn from far away, giving you no chance to fight. So you can see these are incredibly nebulous terms. These terms are just insanely nebulous, meaning that they don't really pinpoint anything, and therefore it's really hard to get behind an idea like this. But the general idea of, you know, people shouldn't be dying straight away when they have, you know, when they are just getting shot from 50 different angles, yeah, I agree with that. You know, it definitely is something which isn't great, and it would be nice to see changed, but we need a little bit more of a push forward with it, because I'll give you a great example, right? 38th Parallel. So 38th Parallel is a map where it's quite hard to spawn camp on it, in the traditional sense, which is staying far away and being able to look into the spawn and shooting things as they come, you know, as they spawn in. It's incredibly hard to find positions on the 38th Parallel after they fix, you know, the hill glitch, or well, not glitch, but, you know, the hill spot, to actually do. You know, it's very hard to actually do that. So what you do is you just wait and look at the roads which come out of the spawn, where there are 3 of them. So therefore you just need 3 tanks and you can cover the whole map when it comes to the spawns on the enemy side. And this happens for both sides, you know, there's only 3 paths out. So technically, the idea that Tesla is putting forward here is true on the 38th Parallel. It's you don't have line of sight, and it also can be defended. But you can't leave the spawn, because of the fact that it only takes 3 tanks to cover the whole map, because there are 3 lines where you can leave the spawns, and you just sit a tank on each of those lines, right? So it is, once again, it's a good idea, because, you know, it would be nice to try and get rid of spawn camping, but we need more definitive stuff here instead of just very nebulous things that we see. The next one is from Drunken Jedi, and what this is talking about is just a simple increase in decal slots. This is pretty much just talking about the idea that he would like to see just more decal slots overall. So for free-to-play players, you still have the 2 slots by default, but you also have 2 additional slots which you can unlock via Marks of Distinction, which is, of course, the Marks of Distinction is where you get so much RP with the vehicle, you therefore have technically maxed it out or aced it, so therefore you should get extra additional slots for it. And then for premium accounts, you would get 4 slots by default. So what this would do is it would give free-to-play accounts the ability on their favorite vehicles that they play a lot to be able to put 2 more decals on it, and then on the premium accounts you can pretty much just put, you know, the normal 4 slots by default, which we already have, but have the additional slots on top of this. So you have a total of 6, as long as, you know, you ace the vehicle. I like this idea. I think it's good. It's a slight change in the game, and it doesn't, you know, negatively affect anybody, whether it be premium or free-to-play. It is beneficial to both, so I agree with Drunken Jedi on his idea here. I like it. The next one is a very long one, and we're not going to go through it all, because there is an inherent issue with it, as there is always with these discussions. So this is from Kamikaze 21358, and I can guarantee 90% of people did not read through this, because the majority of it doesn't actually, well, I shouldn't say the majority of it, a lot of it, when it comes to its writing, because it's been edited so much, because it's been, you know, because there's been so many changes to it, the problem is that it's got to a point where a lot of the stuff is already outdated, because of the some battle racing changes that have happened over the last few months. So basically what Kamikaze wants to do is he wants to stretch BRs from the 1 to 10.0 range, which when he wrote this was you know, what was around, to the 1.0 to 13.0 range. He goes through a bunch of examples, as you can see here, of BR compression of different vehicles that he says struggle to either fight each other or are just way too far apart, even though they're very similar vehicles. So, you know, examples of the T55A, T55AM, T3485, and T44. like that's a terrible comparison. But, you know, Panther D and Tiger H1, you know, stuff like that, and then M26 Pershing and M26A1, you know, it's pretty much just going through a lot of machines which have either had their BIOS changed or not changed, and going through his beliefs on, you know, which ones should be changed. Now, one thing I will say is when I had a look at Kamikaze, when it came to a stat card, he actually has mainly played the larger nations. So what I mean by this is hasn't really touched any of the minor nations, instead has just very much focused around stuff such as, you know, the Germans and the Soviets, so therefore a lot of the examples are going to be from there, and it's good the fact that that's happening. It's kind of annoying when people try and talk about, you know, matchups that they haven't played too much of, so therefore I will commend them on that. It is really nice to see, you know, that that is happening. So anyway, after going through all of these examples of compression, which he gives, then he talks about why BR compression is getting worse, and basically just gives a bunch of examples to it, even though, you know, decompression has happened over the last few months with the addition of 10.3 and also the maneuverability, or, you know, moving around certain BRs. The fact is, he goes through a bunch of ideas when it comes to what he wants to see going up to 13.3 for vehicles. He also talks about each of the ranges when it comes to these and where he wants to put them. So yeah, he mainly plays Soviets and Germany. He also doesn't really play anybody else in a major way when it comes to his vehicles. So that's why a lot of it is talking about Soviets and Germany. Makes sense. So overall, he goes through each of his ideas when it comes to putting vehicles. You can see here, putting the Leopard 2A5 up to 13.3, keeping the general idea of the 1.0 matchmaking, even though he does talk about 0.7 matchmaking. But the reason why I'm going to skip all of this, because I read through it all, and yes, it's incredibly similar to how everybody else like illustrates what they want from the game. I'm going to skip to here because there is this incessant problem that nobody wants to talk about when it comes to it. And you know, credit to him, he actually talks about this issue, but he just makes up a number. And so let's go through it. With the adverts of 1.0 to 10.0 changing to 1.0 to 13.0, this means there should be an average queue time change of plus 30% theoretically. That's pulled out of your ass. I know where you're coming from with this idea, but it doesn't work like that, because you're basically going every time, you know, you increase it, you are pretty much adding about 10%. So if you go from 1.0 to 11.0, it's going to increase queue times by 10%, 1.0 to 12.0, 20%. That's not how any of this works. That is not how any of this works, because you are not thinking about any of the parts. Plus, on top of this, he actually gives slightly different, you know, statistics at top tier, which is where this would mainly affect. So 9.0 to 10.0 now changes to 11.3 to 13.0. This means theoretically, I love the word theoretically, the BR range increases approximately by 70%, meaning it is possible, hypothetically, we could see 70% increase in queue times. That is a very generous look at how this would all play out. This is not taking into account anything when it comes to meta vehicles. This is not taking into account people not playing each vehicle on average the same, which they don't do in game. People always flock to what is either seen as the flavor of the month or the new vehicle, or what they do is they just play the strong vehicles. That's why you see more Abrams running around than you do something like armored cars, such as the Roycat. It's just is how it is, unfortunately, when it comes to it. So for him, an example, a 1 minute and 30-second queue time can become a 2 minute 33-second queue time. Now, what if it's a 5-minute queue time? You're increasing that by 70%, so you pretty much sat around 8 or 9 minutes. 5 minutes is before they changed matchmaking. Remember that they made top tier for aviation. They made it a complete mixed battle to, you know, give them more data on how to balance these vehicles. It was very, very easy to see a 5 to 6 to 10 minute queue time, depending on what BR you're playing, and it still is easy to see it. I see it in my Swedish around 6.7 quite a lot. So this idea of just adding 70% to that, that's 10 minutes sat in a queue for a game, which could last 10 minutes at most. This is non-negotiable, this is terrible, and cannot be got over. It's as simple as that. So yes, the suggestion written out is incredibly nice, it's incredibly wonderful, but you can't solve the problem of increased queue times. And people talk about, top tier, either the player base, not being large enough or it should be larger. This is a great way to kill it, because now you just have a bunch of people who are sat around doing nothing for 10 minutes at a time, instead of them before doing nothing for 3 to 4 minutes at a time, which is a hell of a lot better. And this isn't even thinking about what if you're squadded up and it's trying to find a squad, against you. Like that isn't even something that is taken into account here. There's just a ton of things which, even though this is really well written, and even though it's great going through, it's still got the problem where it can't deal with the queue time issue. A lot of people try and get around this issue by basically saying, well, if you decompress it, then you'll bring more players to the game. Well, I mean, maybe. There's no way we can really know that. And then on top of this as well, if that is the case, then they still have to grind to top tier. That's still going to be... Oh, and remember, the same people saying that it will bring new players to the game are also saying the grind is too hard. So what's going to happen is you're going to get this massive influx of players because of the fact that, they've increased the BR range. But then they're all going to leave before they get to top tier, because according to some, it takes 2.5 years to get to top tier. People who like pulling numbers out of their ass. So the problem is, you're screwed. Like you're screwed. Or I suppose what you could do is you could lower research across the board, and then also you could lower the amount of research required across the board, and then what you could also do is you could make it easier to get to top tier and increase the BR stuff. Yeah, that's great. Okay. Now, that cuts into Gaijin's bottom line. What are you going to do about it? And that is another problem, which even is predicated on two things which we can't guarantee on. So, the fact is, PRD Compression will come. It already did last year in the form of 10.3, and also the expansion of other BRs, but it isn't just something that can be pushed so hard into the idea of 1.0, and don't even think about 0.7. I'm not sitting around for 20 minutes looking for a game. That's not happening. As a person who likes playing a lot of the game, instead of just the meta vehicles, instead of just the major nations, I'm not sitting around for 20 minutes. And I don't think many other players are going to, and the fact is that will kill off minor nations, because everybody will just play the top 3, as they normally do. The next one is from LX12, and it's actually talking about a cool suggestion. So we have ammo racks in the game. We have first stage, ammo stowage, and then we have pretty much the rest of it. What LX wants to do is to try and make this system a little bit more on the user of the vehicle, and I kind of like that. So the first idea is to have 3 separate areas. So you kind of have a quick reload, a medium reload, and a long reload. And this is shown in the form of this T44 that you see right here. The idea is, from this T44, there we go. From the T44 is you have, as I said, 3 areas. You've got basically what the first stage ammo rack is, which is, in the turret. So this would be your green part, which would have the quickest reload. Then you have the secondary ammo rack, which is the yellow one, which would have the medium reload. And then you have the one which is furthest away from the gunner or the loader, which would be the long reload. So instead of just having it where you have a first stage and then an everything else, which eventually feeds into the first stage, now instead you split it into 3 separate areas. Now the second change would be able to customize your ammo placement. So what you do is you take those 3 areas, it tells you, where is your longest reload, where is your medium reload, where is your fast reload, and you can add what you want to it. So this is shown with the Tiger 2. The Tiger 2 obviously having quite a large first stage ammo storage area in the back of the turret, turret, it can get pinged quite a lot through the turret and exploded because of this fact. So what this would do, this change, it would be on the player to be able to move their ammunition around. So you'd have a smaller first stage rack in the form of this, then you would have a decently sized medium rack which would feed into the first stage, but only for these shells that you've selected. So if you fire 2 shells out of your first stage, then they'll get replaced here. Or you would, go on to your secondary reload of your medium, and then you have, of course, the third stage, I suppose you'd class it as, which would be a long reload. So overall, it just gives you more customizability when it comes to the ammunition that you put in the vehicle and where you want to put it. And I think this is just great. I really like this. The third point is about autoloaders, like how our autoloader is going to work. So it's pretty simple, the same idea. You still have the 3 stages, but you have the autoloader on top of it. So the autoloader, the way it works right now is if a gun is autoloaded, then it has a reload time for that autoloader, and that cannot be changed by crew skills. And then once that autoloader is depleted, or once parts of it are depleted and you have already reloaded the next shell, but you haven't fired it, you are able to put ammunition back into the autoloader while you're just milling about. So you just add that idea, but you still create the 3 stage idea like he's done here, and you fill from each of the stages, and it takes longer and progressively longer depending on what stage you are on to reload the autoloader. That's about it, and this wouldn't change any pre-existing things that exist in the game. It would just add on top of the ammunition ideas, and I really like it. I really think this is a cool idea, and it's really the first one on top of the decal one, which I think is just simple, it's effective, and it gives players more choice when it comes to customization, which I think is always great. The next one is from Grucy, and this is talking about the advanced armament selection and management for aircraft. Now, when I thought about this, I thought he was going to talk about, pylons, because everybody, whenever they talk about this topic, they talk about pylons, and that's not the case. Instead, what Grucy is talking about is being able to, with the loadouts that you have, either use specific, munitions that you have on the machine in different ways. So what you might know is, let's say you have a P-51 Mustang and you decide to take the 2 1,000-pounders. You can only, in realistic, drop them together. You cannot drop them individually. Now, what Grucy wants to do is he wants to add in a system which which selects the pylon or the weapon, then says single or a pair, then a series for that, and then puts an interval on it. So 4 stages. So what you would have, let's say, using the Mustang as an example, the pylon of the weapon that you use would be the 1,000-pounders, then you would drop them in singles, so they wouldn't drop together, then a series of 2, so you would drop 2 overall, which is the 2 that you have, within intervals of 0.5 seconds. So you do drop them independently from each other with 0.5 second intervals instead of at the same time. So it just gives more chance for the player to be able to control what loadouts that they use. There's also the fact that, when it comes to rockets, it would be much nicer to sometimes be able to fire a single rocket instead of 2 of them, which is what we see, in ground realistic. Another thing is in air realistic, when it comes to bombers, there are some bomb loads out there, such as like the Griefs one, which is labeled here, and also many other ones, which are just kind of awkward when it comes to the general base bombing idea. So what Grucy wants to do is, so you will be able to drop the 500s before dropping the 1800s. So you would be able to select which one you want to drop first, drop them, hit the bases, and then hit the airfields with the 1800s. So instead of just being stuck in this area where you have to drop certain ordnance before dropping others, you would actually have fully control over your munitions and what you can do with them. So yeah, more power to the player, more more ideas, I think, like this are much better than other ones. I like the idea of having all of this inbuilt. I think all of it would work pretty well. The only problem is the amount of keys that you would need to be able to use all of these. It might be a little bit all over the place. The next one is from Magazine 2, and it's talking about the Villers-Bretonneux, which, if you don't know, is a small village in France. And what this was a very historic place. So we know, obviously, the tanks of World War One. We know the fact that in World War One there wasn't very many tank battles overall, but one thing that there was a first one, and this was the site of the first one, Villers-Bretonneux. It was pretty much where a bunch of British Mark IV tanks, 3 of them to be exact, faced 3 German A7Vs, and they engaged them. 2 of the British Mark IVs, they were female tanks with only machine guns, and they were damaged and forced to withdraw, but the male tank, which had 6-pounders, was able to hit and disable the lead A7V, which was then abandoned by its crew, and the Mark IV continued to fire on the 2 remaining German A7Vs, which withdrew, and the male then advanced with the support of several Whippet light tanks which had arrived, and it was disabled by artillery fire and then abandoned in the crew. So what Magazine wants to do here is to create a little event around the first tank-on-tank battle in World War One, which I think is kind of nice. The idea for him is to make a small town which would be similar to Villers-Bretonneux, and the events would obviously be in the events area. There'll be 2 teams. Britain would have the Mark IV, and then Germany would have the A7, and if you got 10 victories in it, you would be able to either keep the tank Mark IV, so the British tank, or the A7 6, which of course was the German tank. So yeah. Oh, sorry, the A75, not the A76. So yeah, it's a pretty simple idea, you know, just an event to commemorate World War One, and just to be able to give some unique tanks to players through it, and be able to enjoy the overall idea of these big bustly things without having to add them to the game, because of the fact that they wouldn't, you know, fit too well in the game. These would be probably just sat, you know, as little kind of decorations in the hangar. I don't think you'd ever want to take these guys out, but I think they should be represented somehow in War Thunder, and through a little event which is more player focused, which is more designed, you know, to actually give back and give some cool gift vehicles to the player, I think is the way to go when it comes to it. So yeah, I'm fully in support of this. The next one is from Baxter, and Baxter has an issue. And it's an issue that I also share, because I've started playing some high-tier SPAAs too. So Baxter, when it comes to ammunition on top-tier SPAAs, there is a problem with the reload. And it's basically because of how the reload is set up. It's set up in a belt-fed form, so therefore what you'll find on a lot of high-tier vehicles, the fact is they're all... this used to happen a lot with the Kugelblitz before it got changed into clips, but it also happens with stuff like the Chieftain Marksman, the Gepard, you know, anything of that level, kind of 8.0, apart from certain vehicles, but most of them are very much belt-fed, and this is an issue. So when you go to a capture point and you want to actually reload, you have to wait until you expel all of your ammunition on a capture point, and therefore you can start reloading. But because you have so much ammunition that you've expelled, it takes you a year to be able to actually get that ammunition back on board, because the reload animation, when it comes to capture points, it depends on how much you're actually bringing on board instead of just a single clip idea. Also, just to mention in this, one thing I would like to see changed as well when it comes to capture points and the amount of ammunition that you get on board. It would be nice if larger ships like destroyers were able to reload more than one shell at once. That would be grand. But anyway, back to this point. So when it comes to clips or belts, you're able to reload the clips or belts whenever you feel like, whenever they're gone. But when it comes to these high-tier vehicles, you're not able to. You have to sit there for ages and just not really be useful. So you have to either really conserve the ammunition that you have and not use it too much at high tiers, or you need to depend on other areas, such as other AA, such as the automatic, or even missile guided AA. So the idea is to just make it so it's seen as more of a clip-based system, not that it would act like a clip-based system, so you could reload parts of it instead of reload it all at the same time, because of the fact that it would just it's not feasible right now to be able to do it. If you remember back in the day with the Kugelblitz, when it had just its full ammunition loadout of one belt, if you ever tried to reload that thing, it would just take you like 2 to 3 to 5 minutes to be able to do so. And we're seeing this with other vehicles as well, with the higher tier AAs such as the ZSU-23 and also many more such as the Gepard and the Marksman. So I would much prefer if it's reloaded it in chunks instead of as a whole belt. I think this would be beneficial to the AAs and also beneficial to the teams overall. So that is the first half of the mechanics and maps and all of that stuff which was passed to the developers in December 2019. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and well, I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank Ambrosius McClellan, B. Young, Blackie, Chris Giltname, Daniel Stanton, Jay Wilt, John Ryman, Martinez, Moxie, Super Cacti, Trigger Hippie, Eugens Terry, and also Elove Goat and Samuel Slick for supporting the channel.